Okay, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. Before forgetting, first of all, I want to thank Miriam Friedman very much for her continued efforts in keeping us on track, which as I'm sure some of you can gather, at least, maybe all of you can gather, it's keeping me on track is a major, major undertaking. Tonight's shiur is sponsored as a merit for the neshama of Rav Avigdor ben Eliezer Chanoch. His neshama should have an aliyah, and we thank those who sponsored in his memory. The topic for tonight's shiur is kibbud av v'em, honoring one's parents. It's very interesting on the face of it. It seems to be ostensibly a pretty easy mitzvah. Like, I don't know, just be a nice person to your parents. Well, what could be so complicated? But the truth is there are many interesting and sometimes thorny questions that come up on the topic of honoring one's parents. We don't have that many questions that were submitted this time, but actually each one of the questions that were submitted really carries with them a lot to think about. And my guess is that once I answer these questions, the questions and possibly the answers that I give will spark follow-up questions from people. So we'll first go through the questions. As we always do, I'm not going to take comments until we're done going through the list of questions. But if you're worried you'll forget your thought, feel free to put it in the chat and we'll deal with it as we go. Okay, question number one. And thank you to all those who submitted questions. At what point in time can children refuse to listen to their parents' requests? For example, going away together, taking a job that the parents knows is inappropriate. So this is a really loaded question because let's just think this through for a second. So we say in the Torah, I'm supposed to honor my parents. I'm supposed to have reverence for my parents. Let's start with what exactly does that mean? So on a basic level, what it means is the Gemara says that honoring one's parents is doing things to care for their needs, providing food for them, providing drink for them, providing clothing for them, caring for their needs. That's a basic level of honoring one's parents. And having reverence for one's parents, or frequently translated as fearing one's parents, is to not be disrespectful to one's parents. What does that mean to not be disrespectful to one's parents? It means not talking back to them, not actively contradicting them, not referring to them by first name, not sitting in their seat. These are the basic list of the positive things of what it means to honor one's parents and the negative things of what a person should make sure not to do in having reverence for one's parents. But what comes up a lot is a parent wants a child to do something. So we all intuitively understand that, if a child is growing up in the home and the parent says, you better go to bed by such and such a time, that the child should go to bed by such and such a time. In some fictional universe, the children always listen to those instructions from the parents, but we intuitively understand the parent knows best. And what happens once the child gets older? I'm not exactly sure if this is what the questioner had in mind, but maybe it's exactly what the questioner had in mind. College-age child, there's a family vacation. Parent really wants college-age child to go on the family vacation. College-age child has no interest in going. Everyone agrees, there's no question it'll be a nice thing if they go. Do they have an obligation to go? If they say, I am not coming on this vacation, are they in violation of the Torah precept of honoring one's parents? Parent tells child, don't take that job. I'm telling you, I know this field. It's not a good idea. And child says, thanks for your advice. I'm going to do my thing. Is that a violation of honoring one's parents? Just to sharpen the question a little bit, we have the famous psukim in the Chumash, Ish imo v'aviv tira'u, v'yashav sosai tishmoru. Person should have reverence for one's parents and observe the Shabbos. What is the juxtaposition of those two instructions? And so we know the famous Gemara. The Gemara says that even though we're supposed to have reverence for our parents, if they tell us to violate the Shabbos, we're not supposed to listen. So what that says is if a parent tells a child to violate halacha, the child isn't supposed to listen to that instruction. But one could very well make the argument that any instruction short of violating halacha, the child should listen to. That's what it sounds like from that drasha. Don't listen to them because they're telling you to go against halacha. So let's say they're not telling you to go against halacha. Let's say they're telling you to go to bed by 9:30. Let's say they're telling you, I don't know, to stop giving all those shiurim. I don't know. So that was a joke. That was theoretical. But is that a mitzvah? Is that not a mitzvah? What's the story? So there's a lot of discussion over here. As you might have guessed, there's different opinions. So one opinion holds that if it's totally a gray area and a parent asks a child to do this, commands a child to do this or not do that, it's a mitzvah from the Torah. The child is supposed to listen. Now, if you go with that opinion, there are exceptions to that statement. One exception is if the issue impacts halacha in any way, shape, or form. So this is an interesting thing. So let's say there's some narrow opinion in halacha, not the standard approach. Let's say it's like a little bit off the beaten path view. It's a real view in halacha, but it's not a widely held view. So if I were to ask you, what time does Shabbos end? Shabbos ends whenever the Shabbos short says Shabbos ends, right? So, but that's like a standard time, 40 minutes, 45 minutes, degrees, whatever. Are there people out there who keep Shabbos longer? Yes, there are people out there who keep Shabbos longer. As a personal stringency, there are opinions. So let's say a parent tells a child, I'm sick and tired of you not picking up the phone until after 72 minutes. Stop keeping such a long Shabbos. So even the view that says that a parent has a right to give a child instruction about gray areas would say that if it in any way impacts the child's halachic lifestyle, the parent does not have the right to do that. In other words, even if the parent is not telling the child to violate halacha, but the parent is giving the child guidance as to which halachic view they should follow, when it comes to observing halacha, a child is allowed to do their own thing. That's one exception. And the other exception is if this quote unquote gray area will cause detriment to the child. So maybe it's something, maybe the parent is advising the child to do something unhealthy for the child. The parent loves making a l'chaim with their adult child every Shabbos morning. And the adult child, whether it be for weight reasons or other issues, whatever it is, says, I'm really trying to drop that l'chaim. I'm trying to get rid of schnapps in my diet. So you could argue it's a gray area. But if there's a specific detriment to the child does not have to listen to the parent. That's another exception. And sort of along this line of the detriment, let's say parent tells child, I've always wanted you to go to my alma mater for university. I've always wanted you to go to such a university. And the child has done the research, and actually there's another university the child got into that the field that they want to pursue, people who go to University B are much better placed in the professional market than people who go to the parents' alma mater. So there's a real detriment to following the parents' instruction there. There too, they don't have to follow what the parent says. So this is all view number one. View number two is that no, the obligation of the child is to do the things that we listed at the beginning. Help meet the parents' needs, speak and interact with the parent in a respectful way. Don't be disrespectful. But beyond that, if it doesn't have to do with the parent's life, it has to do with the child's life. The child doesn't have to listen. We're talking about a Torah mitzvah here. So generally speaking, the strong encouragement in halacha is, and again, I've kind of created a broad swath of what the two opinions are. The bottom line would seem to be that if a parent asks a child, requests, instructs, whatever word you want to use, to do something in the gray area of life, if the child can't think of any detriment, the child really should do it. The child really should do it. Though it could be argued that the child is not obligated to do it. I want to just say for the record, and I'm not trying to be cute, I want to make a very basic observation on the question that was submitted, because I think there's a lot there in this wording that it's always one of the wisest pieces of advice I ever received from a very wise Rabbi, was to always try to understand the other side of the discussion. So I want to read what was submitted to me. One of the examples submitted was taking a job that the parent knows is inappropriate. So it's a little bit of a sensitive point, but you're dealing with obviously an adult parent who has experienced more in life than what the child has, and certainly a wise parent. The child, presumably in this case, is an adult as well. And actually the child might have insight or perspective that the parent does not have. And it could be that the child doesn't have any more insight or perspective than the parent, but it could be the child and the parent have an honest to goodness disagreement as to what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. When I mentioned before that the child is not obligated to listen to the parent if the advice the parent gives is detrimental to the child, it doesn't have to be detrimental in the parent's view. If it's detrimental in the child's view, we're talking about the child's obligation. So if the child feels that it's a very bad idea to take job A, it's very nice, and the parent is only saying it with love, and you know what? The parent might very well be right. But if honest to goodness, the child feels that there's a downside that the parent is not appreciating, the child does not have an obligation to follow the parent's advice. Now, what the child is obligated to do is to speak to the parent in a respectful way about it, right? In other words, there's no doubt about it. The child doesn't necessarily have to follow the parent's instructions, but the child certainly is obligated, when explained to the parent, if they decide to not follow the parent's advice, to speak in a respectful way. I think that's just something worthwhile to think about. I should also mention that the Gemara says two very famous examples, frequently quoted, of situations that a child is not obligated to listen to one's parents, and it actually fits very well with the kind of the guidelines that we gave. One is regarding Torah study. Child feels that they'll study Torah better in this place versus that place. It's one of the classic examples cited, that the child does not have to listen to the parent's advice. And another one has to do with, if I remember correctly, going to live in Israel. Such a great mitzvah to live in Israel. Child wants to go live in Israel. Parent doesn't want the child to go. It's a very understandable thing. So the child has all kinds of cheshbonos, all kinds of calculations they have to make. And it could very well be that making the parent happy or comfortable or taken care of will be one of the cheshbonos, but there's not a fundamental obligation to refrain from going and making aliyah because the parent said, I don't want you to. So if you think about it, I think that fits very well with the general framework that we laid out. Okay, it was a really interesting question. Okay, next question. Step parents, surrogate parents, adoptive parents, are they treated the same way as biological parents in the halachos of kibbud av v'em? It's a really interesting question and a very, very real question, of course. The Gemara has different additional lessons that it learns from the language of the Torah regarding honoring one's parents. And one of the lessons is that there's an obligation to honor one's parent's spouse, which is clearly addressing the step-parent question. So that would mean, according to that lesson of the Gemara, that the same halachos that apply to how we interact with our biological parents apply when interacting with our step-parents. That's a really interesting statement. Now, two caveats about that. First of all, it seems to be generally accepted that yes, the same halachos apply for the step parent as for the biological parent, but the biological parent has priority. In other words, so imagine the following situation. I guess it could come up in all kinds of circumstances, but people are getting together. A person is getting together with their parent and their parent's spouse, and they're visiting, whatever it is, and they both would like a drink of water. So without doubt, the first person the person should be bringing the water for is their own biological parent. Now, of course, what requires a lot of sensitivity is sometimes the biological parent is not married to the step parent, right? And sometimes the biological parent might even have some animosity for the step parent. Hopefully not, but sometimes these things happen. Sometimes the biological parent might have animosity for the other biological parent. I mean, all these things are very much a real part of life. We all know that. So certainly the biological parent's wishes would come before the step parent's wishes. Having said that, if the biological parent were to tell the child, I don't want you to be respectful to your other parent's spouse, that's like the biological parent telling the child, don't keep Shabbos. The child has a halacha that they're supposed to honor their step parent as well. An interesting additional wrinkle on this is honoring one's step parent is considered an extension of honoring one's parent, which means that the obligation to honor one's step parent is only as long as the biological parent married to the step parent is living. But if the biological parent was no longer alive and the step parent survived the biological parent, again, it's menschlich, of course, to treat the step parent with respect and pleasantness, of course, but there no longer is a mitzvah of kibbud av v'em if the biological parent is no longer living. So that's an interesting wrinkle. Now, it's really somewhat counterintuitive, I think, to the way we would approach things. If I were to ask you, why is there a mitzvah of honoring one's parents? I am pretty confident that the vast majority of us, unless we've heard this discussion before, would say it's common sense. It's hakaras hatov, it's gratitude. Your parents have done so much for you. How could you not honor them? That of course, makes a lot of sense. I should just say as an aside, I have this bizarre split emotion right now. Part of me is so relieved that my parents are not on this Zoom because I feel much less pressure. And part of me is saying, why didn't I give this Zoom from home? Maybe my kids would hear some of what I would say, so it's an interesting, whatever. But here I am in the office, hopefully living up to whatever. Unfortunately, definitely not as much. Okay, but the core halacha is that the reason why we're supposed to honor our parents is because they brought us into the world. That is the basic idea, which means, and it's really surprising for people, a biological parent who put a child up for adoption the day the child was born on one side, and the adoptive parent who has taken care of the child every day since, the Torah mitzvah of honoring is for the biological parent. I don't think we would have guessed that, but that's the halacha. Now, having said that, there's a very, very clear directive in poskim and other sources that, of course, our adoptive parents we have to treat with great derech eretz and great respect. It's basic menschlichkeit, of course, when you think about it. But there's not this additional, it's not technically the chiyuv of kibbud av v'em, honoring one's parents. It is sort of a secondary level. Okay, I hope I answered that question appropriately. Okay. Okay, this is also a very real life question. Okay, a parent, lo aleinu, a parent suffering from dementia makes a request of a child. Is there a mitzvah of kibbud av v'em to fulfill that request or not? First of all, I just want to mention, if you remember what we discussed a few minutes ago, we're talking about honoring one's parents. One of the basic examples we gave was things like feeding and clothing and things like that. It's a terribly difficult situation to be interacting with one's parent who's suffering from dementia, but for whatever it's worth, if one has the ability, the energy in some moments to actually physically help them, honestly, they're fulfilling the mitzvah from the Torah in a more direct, more special way than the vast majority of us have the opportunity to do. I don't say that because I think it's easy. I don't think it's easy, but I say that hopefully it gives a person a little bit of chizuk if they're dealing with that very difficult situation. I'm not exactly sure what the intent of the question was, so I'm going to address two different scenarios. Scenario number one is the parent with dementia makes a very reasonable request of a child. They might not even know that this is their child, but they want somebody to turn the air conditioning on. So they've conveyed that they'll be more physically comfortable if they turn the air conditioning on, if the child turns the air conditioning on. Pursuant to what we talked about earlier, the parent, for some reason, and maybe this is a nonsense kind of thing, but for whatever reason it is, it's important to the parent that somebody should, pick up the grocery bag right now and hold it up and down 3 times, something that doesn't seem to make any sense. If it will bring the parent some comfort, satisfaction, it's a great mitzvah the child is performing. So even if the parent doesn't even know this is the child, lo aleinu, but we know that happens. Even if the parent doesn't know that this is the child, if the child, knowing that this is the parent, is able to do something to help meet the parent's needs or bring the parent's satisfaction, they fulfilled the mitzvah from the Torah. Now, let's say the parent, this is of course relevant beyond the realm of dementia. Let's say the parent asked the child to do something that's detrimental to the parent. The parent is really not supposed to have, the parent is a diabetic, the parent is not supposed to have food with sugar. And the parent wants the child to give them cookies, to buy cookies for them. So we would say that's not a mitzvah. In other words, if it's going to be something that's detrimental to the parent, it's not a mitzvah to do it. Again, as we said before, it is a mitzvah to not be disrespectful when conveying, not to talk to the parent in a sharp way. Again, easier said than done sometimes, but that would be the story there. So even if the parent is not clear of the current situation, if there's something the child could do to make the parent happy, that's a great mitzvah. They're absolutely fulfilling the mitzvah. If the parent is asking for something that's detrimental to the parent's own well-being, the child does not have a mitzvah to do it and would be wrong for the child to do it. Okay, I hope I captured that one for what the person was thinking of. Okay, another very, very hard one. The parent is, the parent is, for lack of better terminology, the halachic terminology would be the parent is a rasha. The parent is a bad person. Is there a mitzvah of kibbud av v'em? You could think of modern day examples that we can relate to. The parent exploits people in all kinds of ridiculous ways to make money off of them. Parent is a drug dealer, Rahman al and something terrible, absolutely terrible. We can appreciate person is mortified that their parent leads a life like that. Unfortunately, what's much more common, a parent has been abusive to a child. Child grew up with an abusive parent. This is not the thing of fiction. We all know that. And it's not fiction in the Jewish community either, nor is it fiction in the Orthodox Jewish community. Child grew up with an abusive parent, abusive in all kinds of ways, the various possibilities. And the child doesn't want to have anything to do with the parent. Does the child have a mitzvah of kibbud av v'em? Parent says, I want you to come visit me once a year. Does the child have a Torah mitzvah to do that or not? What a terrible question. But a very real one. Let's go step by step on this. First of all, let's take it out of the very challenging situation of the abusive relationship. Let's put the abusive relationship to the side for a second. We'll come back to it. But let's just say, objectively speaking, the parent is really not a good person, like really not a good person. Does the child have a mitzvah kibbud av v'em or not? There's different opinions about it. There's a school of thought that says, we just said before, the reason why there's a mitzvah kibbud av v'em is because this person brought you into the world. This person brought you into the world. Person brought you into the world. That's it. They are good, they're not good, it's irrelevant. That's one school of thought. The other school of thought is, and there are other mitzvahs this way, the other school of thought is that in general, when we talk about interpersonal mitzvahs, if a person really, really is a bad human being, I just want to be clear, we're not talking about that they say Lashon Hara every now and then, and we're not talking about they don't give enough tzedakah. We're talking about really a bad person. Person's really a bad person. That's not the kind of people the Torah was talking about when it said treat another member of Klal Yisrael this way or that way, and you're exempt from kibbud av v'em. So that's a dispute. Now, let's go on to the more I think more complicated part of the question, which is if it's emotionally painful for a person to interact with the parent. Generally speaking, if a person really grew up in an abusive relationship, my impression is most mental health professionals would tell a person if they really were in an abusive relationship and they're no longer interacting with the abusive party, it could be very much their emotional detriment to re-engage. Again, obviously I'm sure every case is different, but I think that's the general rule of thumb. So if it's fundamentally detrimental to a person's emotional well-being to engage with the parent, so the generally accepted thing among poskim is that they don't have a mitzvah to engage at that point. Now, every situation is different. My point is not to answer the shaila in this Zoom. My point is to sort of give the parameters for the question. It could be a specific situation. Canon should be discussed with the rabbi that one is comfortable with. It could be a specific situation. Canon should be discussed with the mental health professional person is comfortable with, and maybe both together or separately, whatever is right for a person. But I guess I just want to put out there that the emotional challenge of interfacing with an abusive parent is a very real and legitimate part of the halachic calculus. And on the other hand, if it's not emotionally challenging, if it's just like a thing, like my parent is such a good for nothing, forgive my language, I don't have any emotional difficulties. I just think the parent is I'd rather spend my time helping people who I think are better people. The general accepted view is that if a person doesn't have an emotional challenge in interacting with the parent, they should be doing it. A really interesting question was posed Is there a concept of honoring one's parent after the parent passes away? Is there a concept of honoring one's parent after a parent passes away? So the basic answer is yes. The two most dramatic examples of honoring a parent are certainly, by the way, Avelos, mourning during the year that the parent has passed, is considered paying honor to one's parent. Just an interesting thing to think about. We think of mourning as sort of emotional therapy for the bereaved, which of course it is, but there's a whole other component. It's considered honor to one's parent that a person's life is fundamentally different, and they need to mark that very significant change because their parents' passing is so significant to them. So that's one thing. For those who are in the situation to say Kaddish for a parent, whether it be during the morning, during the year of mourning, Yortzites, lighting Yortzeit candle, doing things to mark the Yortzeit, or mitzvos to mark the Yortzeit, all of those things are considered honoring one's parent. It's considered to be a great thing. Again, many people don't have the opportunity in one way or another, but for those who have the opportunity to name a child after one's parent, is considered a great act of honoring one's parent. And of course, if a person has a grandchild who's born and one's child names the grandchild after one's parent, then that's certainly also, it wasn't one's own decision, but it's sort of a vicarious thing. It's sort of a second degree level of honoring the parent. It's interesting, we're not supposed to refer to our parents by first name. So I saw it brought down that there's an idea of not referring to a parent by first name after they passed as well. Now for that, if it's like an informational question, your name is such and such. Who are your parents? Like, which branch of the family are you? So that there's room for leniency if it's like an informational question. But if a person's just like telling a story, it's fascinating. If a person is diligent, like they're telling a story about their parent, and the parent's name is, it's not fundamental to the story, which is part of the story. The friend, my parent's brother, said to my parent, Bob, to specifically make it their business to not refer to the parent by name, by their first name, is a way to pay honor to one's parent even after they've passed. It's an interesting thing to think about. The questioner specifically listed, I must confess, when I saw the question, I did a double take, and then I saw it brought down. Questioner said that somebody told him after his parents passed that, like we say in Ben Shigarachmani Varach Savimori Vesimorasi, that a person could say that even after their parents passed away. Now, when I read that, I did a double take. Like, what? So that's not the widely held thing. Standard practice is if a person's parents are no longer living, they don't say that. But I saw it brought down. The Munkacher Rebbe evidently had this position that you're blessing their souls. But I guess the core answer to the question is whatever is done in memory of a parent, whether it be naming a child, again, speaking of Ashkenazim now, of course, whether it be naming a child, whether it be, mourning observances, Yortzeit observances, all of those types of things are all ways to pay honor to a parent. By the way, we spoke a few minutes ago about a parent who didn't conduct themselves in an appropriate way. That same question is relevant after the parent passes as well. Okay, that is it for the submitted questions. So what we're going to do now is I'm just first going to go through the chats. Let's see what's in the chat. If people have additional questions, feel free to put it in the chat. Once we're done with all the chats, if people don't want to put it in the chat, we'll give people the opportunity to call out questions also. Hold on. Huh. Okay, the person who submitted the personal story was very interesting. Thank you for sharing it. Interesting question. The question posed was, person's father passed away, but the person's uncle, the deceased's brother, is still living. So how much honor does the child or the nephew / niece have to pay to the uncle who's still living? So to the best of my knowledge, there's no mitzvah of honoring one's parent's sibling. It's derech eretz. It's derech eretz. It's an elderly person. It's a member of the family, but I don't think it's specifically an extension of honoring one's parents. Okay. Thank you for that additional remark. I appreciate it. Thank you for noting it. Okay. Any other questions? Nothing else is coming in the chat. If anybody wants to call out a question, please feel free to do so.
Yes, Rabbi.
Mrs. Spiro?
Yes. Speaking about honoring deceased parents, what about cemetery visits? A, do you have to go? And B, to what extent when they live far away?
That's a great question. Thank you for raising it. I would not say one has to go to the cemetery. I would not say it's an obligation to go to the cemetery. I would say it's a very meaningful way to honor one's parents. Of course, I'm sure you're aware of this, but just to make sure everyone's on the same page, there are 2 times where there's a clear custom of going. There's a custom of going sometime around the yortzeit if one's parents passing, and there's a custom to go Elul time. There are people who are very, very diligent about it. It is a way to honor one's parents' memory. It is not an obligation to the best of my knowledge. And let's put it this way, in terms of your follow-up question, in terms of to what extent this person has to do it, the grave is far away and this and that. Let's think about the yortzeit for a second. So every mitzvah a person does, especially, could you imagine if a person admired a certain conduct in their parents' life, and they say to themselves, you know what, I admire that a ton. I can't say I do that so much in my life, but it really means a lot to me. In honor of my parents' yortzeit, I'm going to make it my business to. A person's parent was very hospitable, and for some reason, a person's very shy. It's difficult for them to be hospitable. And they say, you know what? That's it. Every Shabbos preceding the yortzeit, I'm going to have guests. I'm going to have guests with a boom like my parents used to do. I'm just giving. There can be so many examples. What a beautiful way! First of all, what a great source for the parents to shama for the yortzeit. What a beautiful way to honor them. So let me give you another example. A person sits and says, it's my parents' yortzeit. I want to sponsor learning in a yeshiva to mark the yortzeit. I want to make some donation to a worthwhile cause to mark the yortzeit. What an amazing thing to do for the person's neshama. So now, let's say the person is, it's this 3 days long trip to get somewhere, or it's a ridiculously expensive plane ticket, or there's various ways to honor the neshama. And I don't think people should see that the only way to honor the neshama is to go to the kever, to go to the grave. Now, having said that, it's a very meaningful way and it's a very significant way, but I think everything has to be balanced. And I think it's okay, and not just okay, but wise for a person to really kind of make their own cheshbon as to what might be the most effective, efficient way to honor one's parent's soul. And if I could also add, things change in life. Our life circumstances change, our energies change, our financial situations, everything changes either way. And what made sense 5 years ago might not make sense now. I hope I answered your question on some level. Thank you. Okay, there's some chats have come in the interim. Honoring one's grandparents. If I remember correctly, it's not included in Kibbut Av V'Em, if I remember correctly, though of course it's absolutely considered appropriate in halacha to honor one's grandparents. it's very much an extension. People who one's parents are obligated to honor. It's I think it's sort of like a secondary level of on more like not necessarily the specific thing, but I have this safer. Let me just check very fast because I would feel very bad if I'm wrong about it. Give me 1 second if you don't mind. I'm sorry. Apologize. I don't like to do this, but this is, I think, such a relevant question. Oh, wow. Okay, I'm glad I looked it up. It's understood to be a very high level of honoring one's parents. Thank you for posing the question. Sorry for the mistake. Honoring one's grandparents is significant. There's a question similar to what we discussed before. It's a question if one's parents have passed and one's grandparents are still living, is one still obligated to honor one's grandparents in the same way? In other words, is the honor of the grandparent an extension of the honor of the parent in the sense that it brings the parent pleasure that the child is honoring the grandparent? So there's a question about that, but there's certainly a concept of honoring one's grandparents. Presumably, yeah. Okay, thank you. Thank you for that question. Thank you very much, Mrs. Arzov, for that example. That is one of the others. I forgot to mention it. A child does not have to abide by a parent's choice in terms of zivug, in terms of suggested marriage partner. It would probably be wise for a child to take parental input, being that the parent is wise, has seen a lot, etc., knows the child, but it's not a personal obligation to take the parent's input. Thank you very much. Wow. What a hard question. A parent has dementia. To what extent is it permissible to lie to the parent? So the person even gave a specific example. The parent with dementia is expecting to see her parents soon. She's talking about seeing her parents. So again, one presumably doesn't have to actively lie, but I suppose the question is something along the lines of parent turns to child and say, they're coming in 5 minutes, right? The person's parents are long gone from this world. So it's false to say, right, they're coming in 5 minutes. But what are you going to go through every time? And by the way, so here's, I think, the punchline. Besides the fact that it's tremendously tedious to explain it all every time, it will probably cause the parents distress, right? There are so many accounts about people who have dementia and like they keep on wanting to know where their parent is or where their sibling is or where their spouse is. And then every time you tell them that the person is no longer living, it's like Avelis all over again. They get reminded that they lost this loved one. So something like that, the telling the truth will actually cause the person pain. I think we would say it's your way of respecting them, of honoring them, of caring for them, is to minimize their pain. I think we would say that. As a general level, if there's a way to not explicitly lie, I think it would be better. So I'm just imagining circumstance. A parent says, they're coming in 5 minutes, right? Maybe it's something like, sounds good. Sounds good is different than right, but yes, but if that's what they need to hear, I would just say whatever they need to hear. I hope I answered the question. Very sad question, but good one nonetheless. Okay, anything else?
Rabbi.
Yes.
On that question, Rabbi Ammer, I asked him once whether my sister-in-law was in the hospital with MS. And her question we asked Rabbi Ammer was whether when my mother-in-law asked about her, whether we could say she was in the hospital or could we lie? And he said, you could lie. Don't cause her more distress.
Yeah.
Now, my question, though, is different. I have a cousin who was born out of wedlock. And he, after 80 some years, he wanted to find out who his father was. And then today I tried the paperwork and had no luck, but my genealogy research. But I said, there is a DNA method. And he instantly found his brothers, half brothers, and the whole family.
Wow.
Does one have an obligation to find the birth parents? You know, there's also people who have donors who they donate their sperm, and it's supposed to be secret for 18 years until the child's 18. But should one look for a parent who might be actually embarrassed about the whole thing?
Really interesting question, Bruce. Thank you. And thank you for the previous story as well. I don't think so. I think if a person, if a person wants to find out, I think that's a different question. But you're asking, is a person obligated? I don't think they're obligated. I think for various reasons they're not obligated. First of all, you touched on a very good reason. It could be the parent would be embarrassed. So the rationale to say they're obligated is that they can honor their parent. And it could very well be the parent will be embarrassed by being approached in that way. So to say a person's obligated, definitely not. Some people are very much inclined to it. They want to do it. I think it's reasonable if a person wants to find out. But if a person doesn't want to find out, it's not comfortable, it could, of course, be very emotionally straining on a person if they're not interested in finding out. I think this is one of these examples that I think our own emotions give us great guidance for what we need and what's best for us. So I think the bottom line is certainly not an obligation, even though it's interesting because one could argue, well, if I find out who it is, then I could do real kibbud avim. But I can't. I think it's very unlikely that's an obligation for a person. Thank you for raising that. Interesting. Anyone else? Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. The next Ask the Rabbi, God willing, people might have heard of it. There's a holiday that comes after Purim. It's before Shavuos, but we'll leave it at that. So we are we're going to do an Ask the Rabbi for that. I hope it's all right with people. I think this format is actually much more effective than the in-person question and answer thing we've had for Pesach for years. So regardless of whatever COVID, comfort levels, I think if everybody felt comfortable being in person, I still think the Zoom setting is really good. You can hear everybody's question. People can submit questions ahead of time. I can be better prepared. If there's 5 people asking the same question in the chat, we can save time by answering it once. I mean, there's so many benefits, and it's all recorded. So I think for all these reasons, it's much, much better this way. So the regular annual question and answer for Pesach, I would like to do in the Ask the Rabbi format this year. People should stay tuned because we just have to sort of double check, just make sure there's nothing on the broader show calendar that's a conflict. But assuming there's not, tentatively we're going to do it Tuesday night, April 5th, God willing. That's about a week and a half before Pesach. I think that's pretty much in step with how we normally schedule the pre-Pesach class. And obviously there'll be plenty of time to submit questions. But my fervent hope is that none of you feel the need to think yet about your Pesach questions, at least until you've had a Hamantash. That's my hope. Of course, if people have general shilas about Pesach, they should, of course, feel free to contact me, not in the Ask the Rabbi session as well. Okay. Thank you again to Miriam, and thank you to all of you who submitted questions. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.